She walked into a Parisian cafe in 1916, dressed in silks and jewels, her eyes scanning the room with practiced ease. Men turned their heads, whispering her name with a mix of admiration and suspicion. To some, she was the most enchanting performer of her age. To others, she was a temptress, a dangerous woman whose beauty concealed something darker. And to the governments of Europe, she was a problem they could never quite solve. Her name was Margaretha Zelle, but the world knew her by a single name, Mata Hari. And she was about to become one of the most notorious spies in history, working not for one country, not even two, but for three. Born in the Netherlands in 1876, Mata Hari's beginnings were far from glamorous. Her father went bankrupt when she was a child. Her mother died soon after, and she was sent away to live with relatives who barely tolerated her presence. But even in her youth, she carried an extraordinary talent, the ability to reinvent herself. This gift would become her most dangerous weapon, more potent than any gun or code book. By her early 20s, she had married a Dutch colonial officer and moved to the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. The marriage was a disaster, marked by infidelity, abuse, and tragedy. When the relationship collapsed, she returned to Europe, determined to forge a new life. In Paris, she transformed herself into an exotic dancer, weaving tales of temple rituals and sacred dances, presenting herself as a mysterious figure from the East, even though her stories were pure invention. The audience didn't care. They believed her because they wanted to believe her. Soon, Mata Hari was the toast of Paris, courted by wealthy men and military officers alike. But fame can be fleeting, and Mata Hari craved more than just applause. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, she was no longer the sensation she once had been. Still beautiful, still captivating, but no longer young enough to command the stage, she found herself looking for new opportunities. And that's when the world of espionage came calling. France needed spies. Germany needed spies. Everyone, it seemed, was willing to pay for information. Mata Hari, glamorous, multilingual, and with connections to officers and diplomats across Europe, was perfectly positioned to slip into that shadowy world. And she knew it. Her first real encounter with espionage came from the Germans. In 1915, she was approached by a German consul and offered money to pass along intelligence. It was an easy arrangement, or so it seemed. The Germans paid her, but she didn't take them seriously. She accepted the money, yes, but whether she intended to truly spy for them is debatable. Some historians believe she treated it as a sort of sponsorship, a way to maintain her luxurious lifestyle while performing and traveling. But once you take money from one side in a war, you are marked forever. Not long after, the French came to her with their own offer. By now, Mata Hari was under suspicion, but the French counterintelligence service believed they could use her. They recruited her to infiltrate German military circles, offering her the promise of money and protection in exchange for information. For Mata Hari, it was the perfect arrangement. Double the pay, double the intrigue. She agreed, but it didn't end there. Her lovers included officers from both the French and the Germans, and even high-ranking individuals from neutral countries. And then came a twist. The British intelligence service also flagged her, watching her movements and communications with growing alarm. To them, she wasn't just a dancer. She was a woman entangled in 3 different intelligence networks at once: France, Germany, and Britain. So was Mata Hari truly a spy for all 3? The answer depends on who you ask. The Germans did pay her, and she did pass some information along, though most of it was trivial or already outdated. The French tried to use her, but grew suspicious when her missions yielded little of value, and the British were convinced she was untrustworthy from the start. The web tightened around her in 1916, when French intelligence intercepted German communications that referred to a spy with the codename H-21. The messages hinted that this agent was passing information about French troop movements, and suspicion quickly fell on Mata Hari. What she didn't know was that these intercepted cables were deliberately vague, possibly even a trap. Some historians argue that the Germans themselves were eager to sacrifice her identity, using her as a decoy to protect more valuable spies. In other words, she may have been betrayed by the very people who paid her. Her arrest in Paris in February 1917 was as dramatic as her life. Soldiers stormed into her hotel room, pulling her from her bed and confiscating her letters, costumes, and diaries. The trial that followed was more theatre than justice. The French government, desperate to show results at a time when morale was collapsing at the front, needed a scapegoat. And who better than the infamous Mata Hari, a foreign woman with a reputation for seducing men of power, now accused of sending thousands of soldiers to their deaths. The evidence presented against her was shockingly thin. The prosecution leaned heavily on her reputation rather than hard facts. They painted her as a temptress, a dangerous woman who weaponized her body against the French nation. Newspapers followed the case breathlessly, printing stories that blurred fact and fiction until the two became indistinguishable. But in the court of public opinion, Mata Hari was already guilty. To her judges, she was not Margaretha Zelle, a struggling woman trying to survive in wartime Europe. She was Mata Hari, the dancer who seduced generals and betrayed nations. In July 1917, she was convicted of espionage for Germany, even though her supposed connections to British intelligence and her double dealings with France were never fully untangled. On the morning of October 15, 1917, Mata Hari was led into the courtyard of a military barracks outside Paris. Dressed in a simple suit, refusing a blindfold, she faced the firing squad with a calm dignity that astonished even her guards. Witnesses claimed she looked straight into the eyes of the soldiers before the shots rang out. Some accounts even suggest she blew a kiss to her executioners, though whether that detail is true or simply legend hardly matters. The myth of Mata Hari was sealed in that moment. But here's the irony. After decades of research, many historians now believe she was never the master spy she was accused of being. The documents she passed to the Germans were of little to no military value. Her connections to French intelligence were vague at best, and the supposed British involvement may have been nothing more than suspicion. It is entirely possible that Mata Hari was not a spy for 3 countries, but rather a woman caught between them, punished more for her reputation than her deeds. Yet, in a way, she truly was a spy for 3 countries, if not in practice, then in perception. To the Germans, she was a paid agent. To the French, she was a traitor. To the British, she was a dangerous opportunist. Each nation projected onto her the fears and fantasies of wartime. She was, in the end, less a spy than a mirror, reflecting the anxieties of an entire continent at war. Her story remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of myth-making, of how a woman who lived on her ability to create illusions was ultimately destroyed by the biggest illusion of all, that she was a master spy who held the fate of nations in her hands. Over a century later, Mata Hari still captivates us because her life sits at the crossroads of truth and legend, reality and performance. Was she a cunning triple agent, or simply a woman playing roles that spiraled out of her control? Perhaps both. And perhaps that's why her name endures, not as just another spy in the archives of history, but as the most famous spy who may never have been one at all.